Imagine waking up tomorrow and the world is completely silent. No traffic, no voices, no notifications. You walk outside, the streets are empty, the lights are still on, but nobody is there. You are, as far as you can tell, the last person alive. Most people imagine this scenario as a fantasy. Unlimited freedom, no rules, no judgment. But here's the question almost nobody asks. How long would it actually take before your mind started to break? The answer is far faster and far stranger than you think. And it reveals something about your brain that changes how you understand every ordinary moment of your life, including right now. Reading this sentence, let's start with a real person who came close to living this exact scenario. In 1704, a Scottish sailor named Alexander Selkirk got into an argument with his ship's captain. He believed the vessel was unseaworthy. He demanded to be left on the nearest island rather than continue the voyage. The captain agreed. Selkirk immediately regretted it. He watched the ship sail away, and he did not see another human face for 4 years and 4 months. What happened to his mind during that time? For the first several months, Selkirk described something close to madness. He heard his own thoughts as if they belonged to someone else. He talked out loud constantly, not because he expected an answer, but because silence itself became unbearable. Modern psychologists have a name for what he was experiencing. It's the same phenomenon studied decades later by a man named John Cacioppo, a neuroscientist who spent his career researching something most of us assume we already understand: loneliness. Cacioppo's research revealed something unsettling. Loneliness isn't just an emotion. It functions like a biological alarm. Just as hunger tells you that your body needs food, loneliness tells your brain that it needs other people. And when that alarm goes unanswered for too long, the body doesn't calm down. It escalates. Cortisol rises, inflammation increases. Sleep fractures into shallow, broken pieces. Your immune system, the very system meant to keep you alive, begins to falter. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If you were the last person on Earth, with no threats, no bills, no traffic, no arguments, why would your body respond as if you were in danger? The answer goes back further than modern civilization, further than cities, further than agriculture. It goes back to a time when being alone didn't mean peace and quiet, it meant death. For most of human history, survival depended entirely on the group. A single human alone on the savannah, without a tribe to share food, take turns keeping watch and fight off predators, rarely lasted long. Evolution doesn't reward comfort, it rewards survival. So the brain that survived, the one that got passed down to you, was the brain that treated isolation as an emergency. This is why loneliness doesn't feel like a mild inconvenience. It feels like something is wrong. Because for nearly all of human history, something was. Now picture Selkirk again, 4 months into his island exile. He began doing something strange. He started domesticating wild goats and cats, not for food, but for company. He taught himself to dance with them. He talked to them as if they understood him. Was this madness? Or was it his brain doing exactly what it evolved to do, desperately searching for anything that resembled connection? There's a darker version of this same experiment, one that wasn't chosen voluntarily. In the 1950s, a researcher named Harry Harlow ran a series of experiments that would never be approved today. He separated infant monkeys from their mothers and gave them 2 artificial substitutes. One was made of bare wire but dispensed milk. The other was covered in soft cloth but offered no food at all. Which one do you think the infant monkeys chose? Overwhelmingly, they clung to the cloth mother, the one that offered comfort, even though it gave them nothing to eat. They would leave it only briefly out of necessity, to feed from the wire mother, then rush back to the warmth of the cloth. Harlow's experiment revealed something the era hadn't fully accepted. Connection isn't a luxury layered on top of survival. For a developing mind, connection is closer to a biological requirement, almost as essential as food itself. So if you were the last person alive, your body wouldn't just miss conversation, it would begin missing something closer to a nutrient. There's a modern example of this too, one that takes place not on a deserted island, but somewhere far stranger, somewhere completely isolated from everything. In 1934, an American explorer named Richard Byrd volunteered to spend an entire Antarctic winter alone in a hut buried beneath the ice, monitoring weather instruments hundreds of miles from any other human being. He wanted the solitude. He believed it would bring him peace and clarity. Within weeks, his journal entries changed. He wrote about hearing his own heartbeat as if it were a stranger's. He began imagining conversations with people who weren't there. Later, an undetected leak in his heating stove slowly poisoned him with carbon monoxide, and for months he battled it almost entirely alone, unable to fully explain to the outside world what was happening to his mind and body. He survived, barely. But he later wrote that solitude, real solitude, was nothing like what he had imagined. It didn't sharpen his thinking, it unraveled it. Why does removing other people do this to a mind that seems, on the surface, so self-contained? Part of the answer lies in something researchers call self-referential thinking. Your brain uses other people as a kind of mirror. You understand who you are largely by comparing yourself to others, reacting to others, being observed by others. Remove that mirror entirely, and something strange happens. The mind doesn't become perfectly calm and clear. It begins generating its own reflections. Imagined voices, imagined presence, imagined conversations. This is not weakness. It is not a flaw in your character. It is simply what a highly social brain does when it's denied the one thing it was built for. There's an experiment that pushes this even further, stripping away not just other people, but nearly all sensation. In the 1950s and 60s, a physician named John Lilly built sensory deprivation tanks, floating chambers of warm water and total darkness, designed to remove almost every external stimulus. Volunteers who stayed inside for extended periods often reported vivid hallucinations, not because something was entering their mind from outside, but because, without input, the brain began manufacturing its own. Which raises the real question hiding underneath all of this. Is your sense of a calm, stable, independent self actually independent at all? Or is it something that only holds together because other people are constantly quietly propping it up? Modern isolation studies suggest the second answer is closer to the truth. Researchers running Mars analog missions, simulated space habitats where small crews live in extreme isolation for months, have found that even highly trained, psychologically screened astronauts show measurable changes in mood, cognition, and even facial expression recognition after prolonged separation from the wider world. Studies from NASA's HISEAS project, based on a remote slope in Hawaii, found that crew cohesion, not physical hardship, was the single biggest predictor of psychological breakdown. In other words, even people who trained for years to be alone still needed each other to stay intact. So here is where this story bends back on itself. Every day, you likely tell yourself a quiet story, that you're independent, self-sufficient, that your sense of who you are exists on its own, inside your own head, untouched by anyone else. But everything you've just learned suggests the opposite. Your stability, your clarity, your very grip on reality is partially outsourced, borrowed from the presence of others, maintained by glances, conversations, arguments, and small, unnoticed moments of connection you rarely think twice about. This is why solitary confinement, even for a few weeks, is considered by many psychologists, including researcher Craig Haney, to be one of the most psychologically destructive experiences a human being can undergo, comparable in some studies to physical torture. not because the body is harmed, but because the mind, deprived of its mirror, begins to distort. Now think again about that opening scene. You, waking up as the last person on Earth. No noise, no traffic, no demands. At first it might feel like freedom, but within days, maybe hours, your ancient biology would begin sounding an alarm that has been passed down for hundreds of thousands of years. Not because anything dangerous was actually happening, but because your brain has never once, in its evolutionary history, learned how to feel safe completely alone. So the next time you're sitting in a crowded room, half listening to a conversation you don't think you care about, or scrolling past a message from someone you haven't replied to, remember this: that mild irritation you sometimes feel toward other people is a luxury. It's the sound of a system that is working exactly as it should. Because somewhere in the story of your species, being surrounded by others wasn't a background inconvenience. It was the only reason any of us are still here to imagine what it would mean to be the last one left.